Good morning, one and all. So, I welcome you all for today's webinar on the topic anterior abdominal wall and its applied aspects by Dr. Sitaram Mitantaya, Associate Professor, Department of Sharira Rachana, JS Ayurveda Mahavidyalaya, Nadia. So, he completed his undergraduation from ALN Rao Ayurveda Medical College, Koppa, post-graduation from our own institution, that is STM College of Ayurveda, Udupi, in the year 2011. And presently is working as an associate professor in the Department of PG and PhD Studies in Sharira Rachana, JS Ayurveda Mahavidyalaya, Nadiyat. He published various articles in national as well as international levels. He also organized many CMEs or workshops related with the cadaver dissection. He presented papers in both national as well as international level, and his field of interest is preparing various types of models, anatomy models related with the anatomy museums like lumen casting, then plastination techniques, etc. So with this brief introduction, I welcome today's guest speaker, Dr. Sitaram Mittantaya, to deliver a guest speech on the topic anterior abdominal wall and its applied aspects. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Nitin. Thank you for welcoming me. It is my privilege to give a talk in my mother institution, which is there in my hometown, actually. I thankful to the management of SDM College of Ayurveda and principal, Professor G.S. Acharya sir, for considering me for the guest lecture in the webinar series of SDM College of Ayurveda, Udupi. And let us directly enter into the subject. I'll share my presentation. Can I, sir? Shall I present?
Yeah, sure.
Is it visible?
Yeah.
Good morning, friends. The topic which is allotted to me is anterior abdominal wall and its applied aspect. You know, abdomen is considered as the Pandora's box. When a patient comes to a physician with complaining of pain in the abdominal cavity, it's physician's duty to identify the organ which is disturbed inside and locate that and treat accordingly. And this can be achieved only when the physician has a proper
1 minute, 1 minute.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can share your screen.
Is it visible? Is it visible?
Yeah.
The slides?
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now it's the job of physician to identify the proper organ which is disturbed and treat accordingly. And this can be achieved only when the physician has a proper anatomical knowledge of location of different organ and their relation to the surface of the abdomen. With this brief note, I'll start with the topic anterior abdominal wall and its applied aspect. So abdomen, it's a part of trunk below diaphragm. It has the following boundaries. It has a roof formed by the diaphragm. It has a floor which continues with the cavity of the pelvis, that is pelvic cavity. Anterior, laterally it has the anterior wall, and posteriorly it has the posterior wall. And my topic of presentation is anterior abdominal wall. The anterior abdominal wall is a firm, elastic, musculofibrous wall. Okay, so it is a musculofibrous, partly formed by the muscles and partly by the fibrous tissue, which is firm and elastic. The firmness provides protection to the abdominal organ, whereas elasticity allows expansion of hollow viscera. Now, this wall is formed by three flat muscles and their aponeurosis, and the wall is strengthened by the rectus abdominis and pyramidalis on either side of the median plane. Now coming to the limitations of the abdominal wall on the surface, above it is limited by the xiphisternum in the median plane. On either side it is limited by the right and left costal margin. Below it is limited by iliac crest in its anterior part, the fold of the groin, pubic tubercle, pubic crest, and symphysis pubis in the median plane. On either side, the wall is limited by the mid-axillary line. So this is the limitations of the anterior abdominal wall. This much area is called as the anterior abdominal wall. The wall has 8 layers. From superficial to deep, the layers are the skin, the subcutaneous tissue, that is superficial fascia, Then there are set of muscles. They are external oblique muscle and its aponeurosis, internal oblique muscle and its aponeurosis, transversus abdominis muscle and its aponeurosis. Then comes the transversalis fascia, extraperitoneal connective tissue, and innermost layer is the parietal peritoneum. So these are the 8 layers which form the anterior abdominal wall. But very interestingly, in the median plane, it has only 6 layers. The muscular layer is replaced by the linea alba. So it is reduced. The number of layers are reduced to 6. And the anterior abdominal wall doesn't have the deep fascia. So these are the 8 layers of the anterior abdominal wall. And in my presentation, I will be discussing regarding the anatomy of all these layers except for parietal peritoneum, all the other 7 layers, and their related clinical anatomy. Now, first coming to the skin. Skin is thin and it is more sensitive. The skin has Langer lines, and the Langer lines are transversely arranged in the abdomen, and this should be kept in mind during the surgery, because always the incision must be given parallel to the Langer lines. If any incision which are given against or perpendicular to Langer lines, it may end up in formation of scar. And whenever we give incision parallel to the Langer lines, the incision mark or scar will not be developed. So this should be kept in mind during the surgery. Then on the skin, there is a median groove which extends from the xiphisternum to the symphysis pubis. Now this corresponds to underlying linea alba. So the underlying linea alba produces a groove in the median plane known as the midline groove or furrow. Now on either side of the median plane, there is a groove which is curved, extending from the tip of the 9th costal cartilage to the tubercle of the iliac crest, to the pubic tubercle. Now this groove corresponds to the linea semilunaris. Clear? Now, sometimes you may find white lines over the lower part of abdomen. They are known as the stria gravidorum, which are irregularly branched white lines found mainly in the multiparous woman or obese, occurs due to degenerative fibrosis of the subcutaneous fat and due to undue stretching of the anterabdominal wall during the pregnancy. So these are the few important features which are found in the skin of the abdominal wall. Now, there is one important feature in the anterabdominal wall, that is umbilicus. What is umbilicus? It is a normal puckered scar in the anterabdominal wall. It is the site of attachment of the umbilical cord in the fetus. Now, coming to its position varies according to age. Normally, in adult, it lies at the intervertebral disc between 4th and 5th vertebra, lumbar 4th and 5th vertebra. So it corresponds here somewhere. And in newborn, the position is slightly lower due to poorly developed pelvic region. And in old age, it comes to a lower level due to diminished tone of the abdominal muscles. So this is the position of the umbilicus. Now coming to the anatomical significance of the umbilicus, the level of the umbilicus serves as a watershed line for lymphatic and venous drainage. So details we will be seeing later when we discuss regarding the lymphatic drainage of the abdominal wall. We will be discussing regarding that. The lymphatics and venous blood flow upward above the level of umbilicus, whereas they flow downward above below the level of umbilicus, and there is no crossing between the level, the level which is drawn at the level of umbilicus, and this make the watershed line in the at the level of umbilicus. Now, the umbilicus indicates the level of 10th dermatom. That is, the skin around the umbilicus is supplied by the 10th thoracic spinal segment. The umbilicus is one of the important site of the portacaval anastomosis. In this image, you can see the blood from the umbilicus drain through the paraumbilical vein to the portal vein, whereas few vein drain through the inferior epigastric, tributaries of the inferior epigastric vein to the external iliac vein. So there is anastomosis between these two set of veins, which forms the anastomosis between the systemic circulation and portal circulation. Now coming to the clinical importance. Anyhow, umbilicus is a scar, but it has an immense cosmetic value, particularly in female. Hence, should be careful during incision around the umbilicus. Now, this is an incidence where post-surgery patient woke up without umbilicus. Okay, so such incidence should not be there, or and if such incidence is there, then the physician may land up in some complication later, legal complications. Now, next moving to the other clinical importance, the visceral pain of the appendicitis is referred to the umbilicus. Earlier, in the earlier slide, we saw that the umbilicus is supplied by 10th dermatome, thoracic 10th segment. Now, the same nerve supply the other, from same segment, the appendix also gets its nerve supply. Now, because of this relation, the pain, whenever the inflammation in the appendix, like in appendicitis, the pain get referred to 10th area around the umbilicus. Now coming to embryological significance, the umbilicus is considered as the meeting point of 4 folds of the embryonic plate. There are 2 lateral plate and head and tail plate. In the embryological life, a defect exists in the linea alba, known as the umbilical ring. You can see here. So later, when the fetus grow, this area is considered as the umbilical ring, and following structure enters into the umbilical ring or enter into the fetal body through the umbilical ring. They are midgut loop herniate into the umbilical cord in the 5th to 10th week, and this returns back into the fetal body in the age of 10th to 12th week of intrauterine life. Then the second structure is allantois and vitellointestinal duct project into the umbilical cord from the fetal body, and umbilical vessels, that is 2 artery and 2 vein, passes through the umbilical ring. Now there are 4 embryological remnant attached to the umbilicus in adults. They are ligamentum teres, which is the, you can see here, so this structure, which is the obliterated umbilical vein, then 2 medial umbilical ligament, which are formed by the remnant of the umbilical artery, and there is a median umbilical ligament, which is the remnant of the urachus. So these are the structures which are found in the fetus. Now, next, coming to the clinical correlation, urinary fistula. Earlier we saw there is a ligament or urachus extend from umbilical cord to the urinary bladder. Sometimes, usually this must be obliterated post-delivery, but absence or inability to get obliterate post-delivery, their patent tube persists which connect umbilicus to the urinary bladder, and through this tube the urine may pass out through the umbilicus, and this condition is known as the urinary fistula. The second one is the fecal fistula. It is due to failure of vitellointestinal duct to obliterate. Usually, cord get connected to the distal part of the ileum, particularly 2 feet proximal to the ileocecal junction, and this cord connect ileum, the antimesenteric border of the ileum, to the umbilicus, and usually in the intrauterine life there is a vitellointestinal duct which must get obliterated post delivery, but sometimes it may remain patent like this. A tube may remain patent, and through this tube the content of the ileum may come out through the umbilicus, and that condition is known as the fecal fistula. Sometimes a part of the tube may get obliterated, whereas the proximal part, the part which is near to the ileum, may remain as it is, and that condition, it is known as the Meckel's diverticulum. And this Meckel's diverticulum may connected to the umbilicus through a cord known as the through a fibrous band. the next important feature here is the enterocystoma. Sometimes a small area in the interval between its umbilical attachment and ileal attachment may persist, or it may persist, and it may get converted into a cyst-like structure, which is known as the enterocystoma. So persistent intermediate part of the vitellointestinal duct, and which is known as the enterocystoma, and this may bulge through the umbilicus. So these are the few abnormality which may develop in relation to the umbilicus and due to the embryological abnormalities. Now, umbilical hernia. The umbilical hernia may be congenital or acquired. The congenital hernia is known as the omphalocele. Here, there is failure of midgut loop to return into the abdominal cavity. So earlier I said in the earlier slide that part of the gut passes out through the umbilicus and it has to return into the fetal body in the 10th to 12th week. Now, any failure to do so may result in omphalocele, where the midgut loop remain outside the abdominal cavity, and it occurs due to persistent extraembryonic coelom. Next is acquired umbilical hernia. Acquired umbilical hernia are of two types again. They are infantile and adult. Infantile, it is small. You can see here this image. This is a example for the acquired infantile umbilical hernia, where the hernial sac remains small and it occurs due to weakness of the umbilical scar, and it doesn't require any treatment. Once the abdominal muscle get their strength, the hernia sac will return into the abdominal cavity. So it doesn't require any treatment. Now, whereas adult umbilical hernia, which is also known as the paraumbilical hernia, here the hernial sac doesn't project through the umbilicus, but it passes through, or it appears through linea alba by the side of umbilicus, and it usually occurs due to previous surgery around the umbilicus or weakness of the abdominal wall muscles, and this require surgical treatment, surgical repair. Now, next, moving to the regions of an abdomen. The abdomen is divided into 9 regions by drawing 4 lines, 2 vertical line and 2 horizontal line. The vertical line are the mid-clavicular line, which extend from the middle of the clavicle to the mid-inguinal point, and the 2 horizontal line, first one at a upper level known as the transpyloric line, which is drawn by connecting the tip of the 9th costal cartilage of both the side, and the transtubercular line, which is drawn by connecting the tubercle of the iliac crest of the 2 sides. Now, these 4 lines divide the abdomen into 9 regions. They are epigastric region, umbilical region, hypogastric region. Then on either side, right and left hypochondriac, right and left lumbar, right and left iliac region. Now, you can see the organs which are located in a particular region, and a physician must have this knowledge before examining any patient. Again, surgically, abdomen is divided into 4 quadrants by 2 lines. One vertical line along the midline, along the median plane, and another transverse line, also known as the transumbilical line, drawn at the level of the umbilicus. Now, these 2 lines divide the abdomen into 4 regions, 4 quadrants, right and left upper quadrant and right and left lower quadrants. And surgeon must have the knowledge of the organs located in each quadrant for a successful surgery. Now, coming to the superficial fascia. So, next layer is the superficial fascia. It contains variable amount of fat. It is the major site of the fat accumulation. Superficial, you can see here this layer from here to here. So this is the superficial fascia. The superficial fascia has the 2 different arrangement at a 2 different level. That is, if you draw a line joining two anterior superior iliac spine, above that line it has only one layer, whereas below that line it has two layers. The two layers are campus fascia and scarpus fascia. The campus fascia is superficial and it is loaded with the fat, whereas so this yellow area, whereas scarpus fascia, it is deeper and it is membranous. The space between the two contains superficial epigastric, superficial circumflex iliac, external pudendal vessels, superficial inguinal lymph nodes. Detail we'll see later. We'll see the individual fascia now. Campus fascia. The campus fascia continues with the fascia of the adjoining areas. You can see here the fascia, campus fascia continues with the fascia of the penis below in the scrotum, and it continues with the perineum. Above, it continues with the fascia, superficial fascia of the thoracic wall. Below, in the thigh, it continues with the superficial fascia, the fatty layer of the front of thigh. So it continues with fascia of adjoining area. It is, and very interestingly, the fascia is devoid of fat over the penis, and it is replaced by the dartos muscle in the scrotum. And here you can see the dissection image where the superficial fascia from the abdomen is removed, and you can see the layer of fat. It is a very thick layer of the fat. The next layer is the scarpus fascia. It is a deep membranous layer of the superficial fascia. It is made up of elastic fibrous tissue. It has a good tensile strength. Midline, in the midline, it is attached to the linea alba. So here you can see in the image. So in the midline, the layer here, glossy layer, what you are seeing. So this is the membranous layer, and in the midline, it is attached to the linea alba. On each side, it is separated from the external oblique muscle from the loose areolar tissue. Below, it crosses the inguinal ligament and attached to the fascia lata. Okay, so here below it crosses the inguinal ligament and get attached to the fascia lata of the thigh, and this attachment lies along a transverse line drawn at the level of the pubic tubercle known as the Holden's line, which has a clinical importance. We'll see later. Now the fascia extends into the penis in the form of Buck's fascia, and it covers the scrotum and extend into the perineum as the superficial perineal fascia, also known as the Colles fascia. Now, between the Colles fascia and the perineal membrane, there is a space exists, which is known as the superficial perineal pouch. This pouch, there is a green fascia membrane, which is known as the perineal membrane, and this black colored line, it is the superficial fascia. That is Colles fascia. Now the space between these, so this space is the superficial perineal pouch, and there is one more pouch exists here. The space between the, you can see here, the space between the membranous layer, scarpus fascia, and the space between the external oblique aponeurosis and this scarpus fascia. Now this space is known as the superficial inguinal space. So superficial inguinal space, it is a potential space between the scarpus fascia and the external oblique aponeurosis. So the clinical importance, the scarpus fascia, earlier I said, it has a good tensile strength, and due to this it forms a firm unit for the suturing of the superficial fascia during the closure of anterior abdominal wall, because the campus fascia is not that strong to suture, whereas the scarpus fascia is membranous and it provide a good support for the suturing. Now the other one, in rupture of the male urethra in perineum, urine initially get accumulate in the superficial perineal pouch. Earlier I said the superficial perineal pouch. If urethra get ruptured here, urine get initially accumulate here in the superficial perineal pouch, and later it get extravasated into anterior abdominal wall in the superficial inguinal space, and it may extend up to the Holden's line up to this line. So the patient will have swelling in this much area. So with this, one can easily diagnose the rupture of the urethra. So now moving to the contents here, cutaneous arteries. The superficial fascia contain few cutaneous arteries, like cutaneous branch of the superficial and inferior epigastric artery, cutaneous branch of the posterior intercostal artery, and superficial branch of the femoral artery. So you can see here the branches of these vessels, what you are finding, they lie in the superficial fascia. Cutaneous vein. The veins accompany the artery and drain. Their drainage is as follows. Above the level of umbilicus, the vein passes upward and drain into the axillary vein, whereas below the level of umbilicus, the venous blood passes downward and drain into the great saphenous vein. And there are few veins here known as the tributaries of the paraumbilical vein. They passes through the ligamentum teres and drain into the portal vein. So these are the venous drainage of the skin. Now, clinical correlation. The superficial veins freely anastomose with the paraumbilical vein, and this plays vital role in the portal hypertension. When in portal hypertension, when venous blood flow in the liver is obstructed, the backflow of the blood occurs in the paraumbilical vein, and through the paraumbilical vein, the blood is passed into the veins which drain the into axillary vein, and the vein which drain into the saphenous vein. And due to this reason, these veins get engorged, they get distended, and they radiate in the form of spokes of a wheel, producing a clinical sign known as the caput medusae. So Medus was a mythological lady in the Greek mythology, and the vessels appear like hair of the Meduse, and that is why the name is given as the caput medusae. You can see this is image of the caput medusae, where you can see engorged veins around the umbilicus. So this indicates the portal hypertension. Now coming to the cutaneous nerves. The cutaneous nerves supplying the anterabdominal wall are the skin of the anterabdominal wall are lower 6 intercostal nerve, cutaneous subcostal nerve, iliohypogastric nerve, and ilioinguinal nerve. Now these nerves are grouped under two heading: anterior cutaneous branch and the lateral cutaneous branch. Anterior cutaneous branch are 7 in number. They derived from the lower 5 intercostal nerve, iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal nerve, whereas a lateral cutaneous branch derived from the lower 2 intercostal nerve, iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal nerve. So here you can see anterior cutaneous branch and the lateral cutaneous branch of the cutaneous nerve. Now coming to the clinical correlation. T7 to T12 and L1 supply the skin, intercostal muscle, and parietal pleura in the thorax, whereas they also supply skin, muscles of the anterabdominal wall and parietal peritoneum. Now, any tubercular infection in the lung may cause radiating pain in the abdominal wall due to common nerve supply, and peritonitis may cause reflex contraction of the abdominal muscle. So there. Whenever the physician try to palpate the abdomen, the guarding of the abdomen occur because of the common nerve supply. Now, during the repair of anterabdominal wall, the T7 to T12 nerve are blocked by giving anesthesia by giving injection along the costal margin, because these nerve exits along the costal margin. You can see this image. So nerve exit along this line. So if you give injection along this line, these nerve get blocked, so that you can easily perform surgery over the abdominal wall. Similarly, to anesthetize the iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal nerve, the injection must be given, or block must be given along a line known as the spino-umbilical line. So along this line, which extends from the anterosuperior iliac spine to umbilicus, along this line, if you give the shots, the nerve get blocked for the surgical purpose. Now coming to the cutaneous lymph vessels, above the umbilicus, the lymph drain into the axillary nodes, mainly anterior group, And below the level of umbilicus, the vein drain into the superficial inguinal node. And this make a horizontal line known as the watershed line, and there is no intermingle between the vessels of the upper and lower part of the abdomen. So now coming to the muscles of the anterior abdominal wall. So with that, I finished with the superficial fascia. Next, moving to the muscles of the anterior abdominal wall. There are 5 muscles in the anterior abdominal wall. They are external oblique abdominis, internal oblique abdominis, transversus abdominis, rectus abdominis, and pyramidalis. So these are the 5 muscles in the anterior abdominal wall. So we'll see one by one. First, coming to the external oblique abdominis. The external oblique abdominis take origin from outer surface of the lower border of lower 8 ribs. Okay, you can see here. So, and among the 8 digits, upper 4 digit interdigitate with the serratus anterior. So you can see here. So this is the origin of the serratus anterior here, and here the origin of the external oblique abdominis. Now these muscles get interdigitate with each other along this line. Similarly, the lower fiber interdigitate with the latissimus dorsi. So you can see here 1, 2, 3, and 4. So these 4 digits interdigitate with the latissimus dorsi. So upper 4 digit interdigitate with the serratus anterior. Lower 4 digit interdigitate with the latissimus dorsi. Now coming to its insertion, most of the superior fiber passes vertically. Most posterior fiber passes vertically downward and insert into the inferior 2/3 of the inserted into the, not interior, it is anterior 2/3 of the iliac crest. The remaining fiber passes downward and medially and end in a broad aponeurosis. So you can see here this white area, it end in a broad aponeurosis, which is inserted into the linea alba, which extends from xiphoid process to the symphysis pubis. The upper border of the upper border of the aponeurosis is free. So this part of the aponeurosis is free, and it is overlapped by the pectoralis major of the thorax. Lower border, here you can see lower border. It is thickened. It is rolled inward, and it extends between anterior superior iliac spine to the pubic tubercle in the form of a ligament which is known as the inguinal ligament. Now it has a extension known as the lacunar ligament. It is a crescent shaped ligament that extends between inguinal ligament and pectineal ligament close to their point of attachment to the pubic tubercle. So this is the lacunar ligament, which is the extension of the external oblique aponeurosis. Now there is a special feature in the aponeurosis. There is a gap in the external oblique aponeurosis, a triangular gap above the pubic crest, which is known as the superficial inguinal ring. Now coming to the nerve supply, the external oblique aponeurosis is supplied by the ventral rami of the T7 to T12 nerve. So anyhow, I'm not going in detail regarding the inguinal ligament and inguinal canal. So I'm not touching that part in my today's presentation. Now coming to the internal oblique abdominis, the muscle take origin from the medial 2/3 of the inguinal ligament. You can see here. So it take origin from the medial medial 2/3 of the inguinal ligament and intermediate lip of the anterior 2/3 of the iliac crest. And also few fiber take origin from the thoracolumbar fascia. The fibers passes upward, forward, and medially, and these fibers lie right angles to the external oblique. External oblique passes downwards and medially, whereas internal oblique passes upwards and medially. So they pass in right angles to each other. Now coming to insertion, the uppermost fiber inserted directly to the lower 3 to 4 rib. You can see here. So uppermost fiber inserted directly into the lower 3 to 4 rib and costal cartilage, whereas the rest of the muscle end in a aponeurosis and inserted into 7th, 8th, 7th, 8th, and 9th costal cartilage, xiphoid process, linea alba, pubic crest, pectineal line of the pubis. So these are the line of insertion of the internal oblique abdominis muscle. Now aponeurosis splits into anterior and posterior layer at the lateral border of the rectus abdominis muscle. You can see here. So this is rectus abdominis muscle. This is transverse section where you can see rectus abdominis of one side, and this is lateral border. At the lateral border, the internal oblique muscle splits into two. Aponeurosis splits into two: superficial layer and the deep layer. The splitting of the muscle extends between the costal margin, so from this level, to the interval between umbilicus and symphysis pubis. So suppose here it is the umbilicus. Now up to this level, the splitting continues from the costal margin to this level. So the splitting remains. And in this level, the rectus abdominis is enclosed by the two layers, that is, and superficial and deep layer of the internal oblique muscle. It has a single layer below this level, where the single layer passes in front of the rectus abdominis. That is, both the anterior and the superficial and deep layer fuses with each other and forms a single layer which lies in front of the rectus abdominis muscle. The internal oblique muscle is also supplied by the 7th to 12th thoracic nerve. The third muscle in the interabdominal wall is the transversus abdominis. It is the most of the fibers are arranged transversely. That is why the name, the transversus abdominis. Origin: muscle take origin from the lateral 1/3 of the inguinal ligament, anterior 2/3 of the inner lip of the iliac crest in its ventral segment, thoracolumbar fascia, inner surface of the lower 6th rib and the costal cartilage. So this is the origin of the muscle. So it take origin from along this line. Coming to its insertion, inguinal fibers arch backward. It forms the roof of the inguinal canal. You can see here. So here you can see the anterior fiber. It is the aponeurosis of the internal oblique, and the posterior one is the aponeurosis of the transversus abdominis. They join together, and here the inguinal fiber, they form the roof of the canal. Here they form the roof of the canal, then turn downward and medially, forming an aponeurosis which join with the similar aponeurosis of the internal oblique and form this combined structure which is known as the conjoint tendon. So you can see here internal oblique aponeurosis and transversus abdominis aponeurosis, they join together to form a common tendon which is known as the conjoined tendon. This conjoined tendon lies behind the canal. You can see here there is a canal known as the inguinal canal. Now the conjoined tendon lies behind the canal, and this conjoined tendon inserted into the pubic crest and the medial part of the pecten pubis. The remaining fibers end in broad aponeurosis which inserted into the linea alba. So here you can see remaining fiber, they end in a broad aponeurosis which inserted into the linea alba. In upper 3/4, it forms a posterior wall of the rectus sheath. In lower 1/4, it forms the anterior layer of the rectus sheath. You can see here in the upper 3/4, the aponeurosis lies behind the rectus abdominis muscle, whereas in the lower 1/4, that is below the level of arcuate line, it moves forward and forms the anterior wall of the rectus sheath. The muscle is supplied by the same nerve, ventral rami of the 7th to 12th thoracic nerve. Now coming to the conjoint tendon, in the earlier slide, I have discussed a little about the conjoint tendon. We'll see detail. The conjoint tendon is also known as the falx inguinalis. It formed by inguinal fibers for the internal oblique and the transversus abdominis. In the earlier image, we saw the two aponeurosis joined together to form a tendon known as the conjoined tendon. It is attached to the pubic crest and the medial part of the pecten pubis. You can see here. So this is the conjoined tendon, which is attached to the pubic crest and the medial part of the pecten pubis. It forms medial half of the posterior wall of the inguinal canal. You can see here, there is a canal extending from the fascia transversalis. You can see here, from here, canal extends along this line and comes out here in the superficial inguinal ring. Now, this canal is known as the inguinal canal, where you can see the cord. Here, in the medial part, the posterior wall of the cord is formed by the conjoined tendon, or in other words, conjoined tendon forms the posterior wall of the inguinal canal. And now coming to its relation, anteriorly, it is related to the reflected part of the inguinal ligament, spermatic cord in the inguinal canal, and superficial inguinal ring. So these are the anteriorly structures which are related anteriorly. Now posteriorly, it is related to rectus abdominis, origin, fascia transversalis, and extraperitoneal connective tissue, peritoneum. So these are the structures which are related posteriorly to the conjoined tendon. Now coming to the rectus sheath. Before studying the rectus abdominis muscle, let us see the rectus sheath, the covering of the rectus abdominis muscle. Later we'll study regarding the rectus abdominis. Epineuritic, the rectus sheath is a epineuritic envelope for the rectus abdominis muscle, located on each side of the linea alba. So you can see here, so this is a linea alba. On either side of the linea alba, there is a sheath which covers the rectus abdominis muscle, and this sheath or this covering of the rectus abdominis is known as the rectus sheath. It has anterior wall, posterior wall, it has medial border and lateral border. We'll see one by one. First, coming to the anterior wall. The anterior wall of the rectus sheath is complete. It is present in its in its entire length from its tip upper end to the lower end. But it has a variation at a different level. Above the level of costal margin, it is made up of single layer. It is made up of only the external oblique aponeurosis. In between costal margin to midway between the umbilicus and the symphysis pubis. Okay, so from costal margin to midway between the umbilicus and symphysis pubis. I'll show you in the image. Okay, so suppose this is umbilicus. So from here to here, so umbilicus to the midway between the umbilicus and symphysis pubis. So here, so from here to here, the anterior wall has the following layer. It has external oblique aponeurosis and superficial layer of the internal oblique aponeurosis. And below the level of the midway between the umbilicus and symphysis pubis, it is free. It is having all the three layers. That is external oblique aponeurosis, internal oblique, both the layers, and transverse abdominis aponeurosis. So it is most thick in the lowermost part. The anterior wall is adherent to the rectus muscle through three tendinous intersections. You can see here, so this is the rectus abdominis muscle, coronal section, where you can see the rectus abdominis muscle, and this is the anterior wall of the rectus sheath. And from the rectus sheath, the three tendinous intersection enter into the rectus abdominis muscle. One at the level of xiphoid process, the another at the level of umbilicus, and third one in the interval between these two. There may be a fourth one. We'll discuss regarding that later. Now coming to the posterior wall of the rectus sheath, the posterior wall is free and not attached to the muscle. There is no tendinous intersection from the posterior wall of the rectus abdominis, rectus sheath. It also show three different arrangement at three level. From costal margin to the midway between umbilicus and symphysis pubis, it is free. There is no fascial sheath. It is directly related to the ribs 6th, 7th rib and costal cartilage. So, and from the once again I'll repeat, above the costal margin, the wall is free and it is directly related to the 6th, 7th costal cartilages and rib. Now, between costal margin to the midway between the umbilicus and the symphysis pubis, this level, it is made up of the following. They are the posterior layer or deep layer of the internal oblique aponeurosis and transversus abdominis aponeurosis. These two form the posterior wall of the rectus sheath between the costal margin to the midway between the umbilicus and symphysis pubis. Below this level, it is the posterior wall is free. The posterior, that is more specifically the rectus, posterior surface of the rectus abdominis is directly related to the transversalis fascia, or in other words, the posterior wall is formed only by the transversalis fascia. There is no aponeurotic sheath in the posterior wall. Now, I said earlier, the posterior wall, the aponeurotic wall of the posterior wall of rectus sheath extends only up to the midway between umbilicus and symphysis pubis. In this level, the posterior wall, that is aponeurosis, ends in the form of a curved line, which is known as the arcuate line. So what is arcuate line? It is a curved free margin of the lower end of the posterior wall. Below this level, there is no aponeurosis, where the rectus abdominis is directly related to the transversalis fascia. Now, in front of this arcuate line, the inferior epigastric artery enters into the rectus abdominis, rectus sheath. So you can see here, this is lower free margin of the posterior wall, and below this wall, the inferior epigastric artery enters into the rectus sheath, and through that it enters into the rectus abdominis muscle. So that much is related to the rectus sheath. Now coming to the medial margin, so we discussed regarding the anterior wall and posterior wall of the rectus sheath. Now coming to the medial margin, the medial margin is formed by linea alba. The linea alba is produced by the interlacement of the fibers of the three flat muscles. You can see here in the image, the medial margin, it is formed by the interlacement of these three aponeuroses of the muscles. Whereas lateral margin, okay. So now before lateral margin, we'll see the attachment of linea alba. Linea alba is attached above to the tip of the xiphoid process, and below it is attached to the symphysis pubis. The linea alba show two extensions. One is known as the suspensory ligament of penis, which lie which is the extension from the superficial fibers of the linea alba, and it extends or it connects linea alba to the dorsal surface of the body of the penis. You can see this image, a dissection image, where you can find a band here which connect the linea alba to the dorsal surface of penis. Now this ligament is known as the suspensory ligament of penis. The second one is the adveniculum linea alba. So it is a triangular expansion by the deep fibers. It passes behind the rectus muscle and attached to the pubic crest. So this triangular extension is known as the adveniculum linea alba. Now coming to lateral margin. The lateral margin is formed by the linea semilunaris. You can see here, so this line which extends from tip of the 9th costal cartilage to the pubic tubercle, this line is known as the linea semilunaris on either side. Now this forms the lateral, you can see here, so this one, linea semilunaris, this forms lateral boundary or lateral margin of the rectus sheath. Coming to the clinical significance, very important, interestingly, the nerve here, you can see here, so this is the intercostal nerve. It passes into the rectus sheath by along the lateral margin of the rectus sheath. Any surgical incision along the linea semilunaris may result in dissection of this nerve. The nerve may get cut, and injury to this nerve may result in the segmental paralysis of the rectus abdominis muscle. So while giving incision, one must be careful to preserve these nerve. Now, contents of the rectus sheath. The three group of content: muscles, vessels, and nerves. Muscles, rectus abdominis, and pyramidalis. You can see here. So this is the rectus sheath, where you can find the rectus abdominis muscle and pyramidalis in front of it. Vessels, you can see here, superficial, superior and inferior epigastric artery, and anastomosis between them, and corresponding vein will be there. Nerves, there are 5 intercostal nerve and subcostal nerve, which lie in the rectus sheath. So that much is related to rectus sheath. Now, one of the largest content of the rectus sheath is the rectus abdominis muscle. It is a multi-pinnate muscle. It is a long strap-like muscle. The muscle is wider above and it is narrow below. Origin of the muscle take origin by 2 head, medial head and the lateral head. Medial head take origin from the anterior surface of the symphysis pubis, and there is interlacement between the fibers of the opposite side in the X-like manner. The lateral head takes origin from the pubic crest and the pubic tubercle. Now coming to the insertion, the muscle passes vertically upward towards its insertion, and muscle inserted into the xiphoid process. You can see here, inserted into the xiphoid process, 7th, 6th, and 5th costal cartilage from medial to lateral. So from medial to lateral, the insertion is xiphoid process, 7th costal cartilage, 6th costal cartilage, and 5th costal cartilage. Now the muscle in its entire course, it shows tendinous intersections. There are usually three tendinous intersections. One at the level of the xiphoid process, another at the level of umbilicus, and there will be one more in the interval between these two. So 3, one at the level of umbilicus, one at the level of xiphoid process, another in the midway between the xiphoid process and umbilicus, third one at the level of umbilicus. There may be fourth sometimes in the interval between the umbilicus and symphysis pubis. Each intersection is a horizontal and arranged in a zigzag line, which is attached to the anterior wall of rectus sheath. Earlier also we discussed regarding that. This is anterior wall. The intersection is attached to the anterior wall. The intersection divides the muscle into shorter segments. You can see here. So the muscle, instead of a single entity, the muscle is divided into shorter segments. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 shorter segments. And this arrangement increases the number of muscle fiber, and you know the strength of the muscle is directly proportional to the number of muscle fibers. So this arrangement increases the strength of the muscle. Now coming to the nerve supply, it is supplied by the lower 5th intercostal nerve and subcostal nerve. Now coming to the clinical correlation, the muscle is used in the reconstructive surgery of the breast, where the upper or lower part of the rectus abdominis muscle is used based on its supply by the superior epigastric artery. So there is a condition known as the divarication of recti, where the two rectus muscle separate from each other. Usually occur in elderly multiparous women with weak abdominal muscles, and also it may occur in the obese person. The epineurisis forming the rectus sheath becomes extremely stretched. Okay, so this rectus sheath becomes extremely stretched. As a result, the rectus abdominis move apart, leaving behind a potential weaker area in the interval between them, and through that the hernia may occur. So that condition, the separation of the two rectus abdominis muscle, is known as the divarication of the recti. Now next is hematoma of the rectus sheath. In later month of pregnancy or in severe coughing, the superior or inferior epigastric artery may get unduly stretched, and it may get ruptured if exposed to blunt trauma on the anterabdominal wall. Okay, so the rupture of the vessel may occur in the pregnancy due to stretch, or it may get ruptured in the ruptured due to trauma in the intra-abdominal wall, and it leads to hematoma. You can see here. So this is the hematoma where inferior epigastric artery got injured. It presents a midline abdominal pain, tender mass. Now this is a image of the CT where you can find the hematoma in the rectus sheath. In caval obstruction, the thoracoepigastric vein connecting axillary and saphenous vein opens up. So, earlier we saw content of the rectus sheath, the superior epigastric and inferior epigastric. Now there is an anastomosis. We saw that there is an anastomosis. In case of caval obstruction, for example, if there is a superior vena caval obstruction, the blood can't flow or can't enter into the heart through the superior vena cava. In that condition, blood passes through the internal mammary vein and from there to the superior epigastric vein and enters into the inferior epigastric vein, enters into the iliac vessels, iliac vein, and through the inferior vena cava, it enters into the heart. Now, in case of the inferior vena caval obstruction, the blood flows through the same route, inferior epigastric, then to the through the anastomosis between the inferior and superior epigastric, internal mammary vein, and finally enters into the superior vena cava, and through the superior vena cava, it enters into the heart. So, in this way, this anastomosis establish a collateral circulation in case of the obstruction of the vena cava. The next muscle is the pyramidalis, the fifth muscle in the intra-abdominal wall. It is a triangular or pyramidal shaped muscle, and it may be absent in few people. The muscle take origin from the symphysis pubis, muscle inserted into the linea alba between the umbilicus and the symphysis. Nerve supply, it is supplied by the subcostal nerve. Action, it is the tensor of the linea alba. Action of the flat muscles. In general, the flat muscles of the intra-abdominal wall, it help in the retention. They help in the retention of the abdominal organ. The tone of the muscle retain the abdominal organ in position. So when the muscle loses its tone, as like in obesity or in pregnancy, the organs may get displaced from their position. That condition is known as the visceraptosis. Later we'll see regarding that. The second function is protection. The organ protect the abdominal viscera from external injury. They produce guarding of the abdominal organ. Compression. They increases the intra-abdominal pressure and compresses the viscera in acts of cough, vomiting, micturition, and defecation. The muscle also produce or also put their action on the vertebral column. When the muscles of both sides contract, they cause a lumbar flexion. The unilateral action causes lateral flexion of the vertebral column. When external oblique of one side and internal oblique of other side contract, it helps in the rotation of the trunk. So these are the few actions of the rectus muscles of the intra-abdominal wall. Now we'll see regarding recent observation in relation to the muscles of the abdominal wall. First one, observation regarding the arrangement of the arrangement at three different regions. The recent observation established that the arrangement varies in three different regions. They are like xiphoid process to the umbilicus, umbilicus to the level of iliac crest, and iliac crest to the inguinal ligament and pubis. Regarding that, we'll see in the next slide. The second observation which is made is aponeurotic fibers show three linear decussations along the entire length of the linea alba. So I'll show you the image. Okay, so there are three linear decussation along the entire length of linea alba, along the linea semilunaris between the umbilicus and a line drawn between the anterior superior iliac spine, and in the interval between them in the anterior wall of the rectus sheath. So these are the three levels where we find the decussation between the muscle aponeurosis. And the third observation, the arcuate line is not well marked. Earlier it is thought that the posterior wall of the rectus sheath abruptly ends at the interval between the umbilicus and symphysis pubis, but presently it is thought that it doesn't occur abruptly. The transformation of the posterior wall into anterior wall is a gradual process. It doesn't abruptly transfer into the anterior. So these are the few recent observations. We'll see few of them. First one, external oblique aponeurosis. On approaching the linea alba, external oblique aponeurosis is divided into two parts, superficial layer and the deep layer. The superficial layer joins with the deep layer of the external oblique aponeurosis. On reaching the linea alba or by crossing the linea alba, it continues with the deep layer of the opposite side. Similarly, you can see the superficial layer continues with the deep layer of the opposite side. The deep layer, after crossing the linea alba, it continues with the superficial layer of the internal oblique aponeurosis. So the deep layer reaches the linea alba. After reaching there, it continues with the deep layer of the internal oblique aponeurosis. So superficial layer of the internal oblique aponeurosis. So this is the observation which is made in relation to the external oblique aponeurosis. Now, a recent observation in relation to the internal oblique aponeurosis. The even internal oblique aponeurosis has the two layers, superficial layer and a deep layer. First, we'll see superficial layer. In between costal margin to the umbilicus, from here to the here, the fibers passes upwards and medially and passes deep to the external oblique aponeurosis and lies in front of the rectus abdominis muscle, reaches the linea alba, and it continues with the deep layer of the external oblique aponeurosis. So superficial fiber, it lies in front of the rectus abdominis muscle, reaches the linea alba, and it continues with the anterior layer of the external oblique aponeurosis. Now, from umbilicus to the interval between the, that is umbilicus to the level of anterosuperior iliac spine, the arrangement is like the first the fibers decussate with the at the lateral margin of the rectus abdominis muscle. The fibers decussate with the both the layers of the external oblique, and the superficial layer becomes anterior most layer of the rectus sheath. You can see here, by crossing these two, it comes anterior most, reaches the linea alba. Again, it forms a second level of decussation and continues with the deep layer of the external oblique aponeurosis. So this is the arrangement between umbilicus to the iliac crest. Below the iliac crest, this layer joins with the transversus abdominis muscle aponeurosis to form the conjoint tendon. So that much is related to the superficial layer of the internal oblique aponeurosis. Now coming to the deep fiber. Costal margin to the umbilicus, the fibers passes behind the rectus abdominis muscle, reaches the linea alba, and continues with the deep layer of the, it continues with the anterior layer of the transversus abdominis muscle. So it continues with, you can see here, it continues with anterior layer of the transversus abdominis muscle. Now umbilicus, here you can see, it reaches the linea alba, crosses there, and continues with the anterior layer of the transversus abdominis muscle. Now, between the umbilicus to the iliac crest, the fiber crosses at the lateral border of the rectus sheath. The fiber crosses both the layer of the transversus abdominis, become posterior most layer of the rectus sheath, and reaches the linea alba, where it makes second level of the decussation and continues with the anterior layer of the transversus sheath or transversus aponeurosis. Clear. So this is the arrangement of fiber in between umbilicus to the anterior superior iliac spine. Now below that level, the fibers gradually shifted. You can see here, below that level, the fibers moves forward. Initially, it was behind the rectus sheath. From this level, it moves forward, joins with the anterior, that is anterior sheath, anterior layer, and finally joins with the external oblique aponeurosis to form the anterior wall of the rectus sheath. So that much is related to the internal oblique aponeurosis. Now coming to the special observation or recent observation in relation to the transversus abdominis aponeurosis. Even transversus abdominis aponeurosis has two layers, anterior and posterior. Green dotted layer is anterior, and a blue layer is the posterior layer of the transversus aponeurosis. above the level of umbilicus, it passes behind the rectus abdominis muscle and continues with the deep layer of the internal oblique. Whereas below the level of umbilicus, between umbilicus to the level of anterosuperior iliac spine, the fiber, the anterior layer gets separated from, it is observed that anterior layer gets separated from the posterior layer and move forward. It move forward and it lies in front of the rectus abdominis muscle. And below the level of iliac crest, both the layer, anterior and posterior layer, move forward and forms the anterior wall of the rectus sheath. So these are the, and they form the conjoint tendon. So these are the recent observation which are made in relation to the rectus in relation to the epineurisis of the anterabdominal wall muscles. So with that, I finished with the muscular layer of the abdomen. Now next moving to the fascia transversalis. It is a thin layer of the avascular, it is a thin layer of areolar connective tissue lining inner surface of the transversus abdominis muscle. Superiorly, it continues with the fascia diaphragmatica underlying the diaphragm. Below, it continues with the fascia iliaca. Anteriorly, it reaches up to the anteriorly, so this layer, it reaches up to the linea alba and joins with that. And posteriorly, it continues, you can see here, fascia transversalis on the inner surface of the fascia, transversus abdominis muscle. It continues with the thoracolumbar fascia, you can see here. So this is the thoracolumbar fascia. So it continues with the thoracolumbar fascia posteriorly. So this is the extension of the fascia transversalis. Now, the fascia transversalis have some special feature. The first one is the deep inguinal ring. The deep inguinal ring is a oval opening, you can see here. So this is a oval opening about 1.2 centimeter above the mid-inguinal point. So it is an oval opening about 1.2 centimeter above the mid-inguinal point. And you can, through this, the inguinal canal begins. The second one is the internal spermatic fascia. You can see here, so there is a blue, there is a green line. So it represents the transversalis fascia. The fascia transversalis extends into the inguinal canal. You can see here, so this fascia enters into the inguinal canal and forms a covering for the spermatic cord. And this covering is known as the internal spermatic fascia, which extends into the scrotum. The next is the transversalis fascia forms anterior wall of the femoral sheath. Okay, so the there is a opening here. You can see the femoral canal. The femoral canal, not femoral canal. There is a opening here. And through this femoral opening, the contents of the abdomen enters into the thigh, and this opening and its extension is known as the femoral sheath. So it forms anterior wall of the femoral sheath. Now there is a stretch of the fascia between anterior superior iliac spine to the pubic tubercle. Now this stretched fascia is known as the iliopubic tract, which lie above the, or which lie deep to the inguinal ligament, and it lie deep to the inguinal ligament. So this fold between anterosuperior iliac spine to the pubic tubercle is known as the iliopubic tract. So these are the special features of the fascia transversalis. The next layer of the wall is the extraperitoneal connective tissue. The extraperitoneal connective tissue is composed of fibroareolar and fatty tissue. So here you can see, so the innermost layer here, so this is the extraperitoneal connective tissue, the yellow layer what you find here, it is the extraperitoneal connective tissue. The extraperitoneal connective tissue is traversed by the following: medial to the deep inguinal ring. They are, you can see here, there is a inferior epigastric artery before it pierces the fascia transversalis, obliterated umbilical artery, or also known as the medial umbilical ligament, which passes towards the umbilicus, and median umbilical ligament, which is the obliterated urachus, which extending from the tip of the or apex of the urinary bladder to the umbilicus. So these are the three structures which traverses the extraperitoneal connective tissue. Now coming to some clinical correlation in relation to the anterabdominal wall. While examining the abdomen, the knees and hip of the patient must be flexed so that the muscles of the anterabdominal wall get relaxed. So by this technique, you can have a free abdomen for palpation. The second clinical correlation is visceroptosis. Due to lack of exercise, muscles of the anterabdominal wall lose their tone, and due to lack of tone, the organ lose their position and they displace from their position, and this condition is known as the visceroptosis. The wall of the abdomen is punctured for various surgical procedures related to gallbladder, appendix, ovary, uterine tube, etc. The surgical incision. There are many surgical incisions which are followed in, or which are done in the anterabdominal wall for the to approach different organ within the abdominal cavity. Few we will discuss here. Supraumbilical median incision. It is called as a bloodless incision because there is no nerve injury or vascular injury or muscle injury, but because there is no blood supply and the directly incision is given along the linea alba, and because it doesn't have a direct blood supply, it doesn't heal properly and leave behind a potential post-operative weakness, and this may result in the development of hernia. The second one, infraumbilical median incision. Here, approximation of due to approximation of the rectus abdominis muscle, it heals better and it prevents the hernia, onset of hernia. The second one is the paramedian incision. So this is the incision which is given along the rectus sheath, along the anterior wall of the rectus sheath. The incision is given about 1 inch lateral to the median plane. The rectus abdomen, after incision, the rectus anterior wall of rectus sheath is separated, and rectus abdominis muscle is shifted laterally. It is dragged or retracted laterally to protect the supplying nerve. And in this incision, the risk of weakness and incisional hernia is very minimal because no muscles are injured in this incision. The next is McBurney's incision, also known as the Gradion incision. It is an oblique incision in the iliac fossa, about 2 inch above the anterior superior iliac spine in the spino-umbilical line. Okay, so the incision is given perpendicular or right angles to the spino-umbilical line. So this incision, through this incision, appendix can be approached, and there is no post-operative weakness developed in this incision. The next is Kocher's incision. It is a oblique incision drawn 2 to 5 centimeter below and parallel to the right costal margin, and through this incision, gallbladder is approached. Then coming to the transverse incision. Transverse incision can be given above the umbilicus or below the umbilicus also. If it is given below the umbilicus, it should be given about 2 centimeter below the umbilicus with the slight upward concavity, because it has to follow the Langer lines to prevent the chance of screen tags. Now, incision given along the skin crease used to explore. This incision is always usually used to explore the pelvic organ. Lanz incision, where incision is given horizontally at the right iliac fossa, and through this incision, appendix and cecum are approached. The second one is the Rutherford. The next one is the Rutherford-Morrison incision. It is a modification of the McBurney's incision only. Its upper end is extended little more. Okay, so through this incision, along with the ileum, along with the cecum and appendix, the ascending colon is also approached. Similar incision is given on the left iliac fossa to approach the sigmoid colon and the descending colon. Next is Battle incision, also known as the Battle Jalaquir Kammerer Lanander incision. It is a lower right paramedian incision, but it is little placed little more laterally than the standard paramedian incision. The phalangeal incision, so it is a popular incision in gynecological practice. It has a good cosmetic effect, and it is also suitable in male, particularly in the prosthetic surgery. So that much is related to incision related to the interabdominal wall. Next is the abdominal hernia. Abdominal protrusion, the hernia is the abnormal protrusion in the interabdominal wall. There are different varieties of hernia may occur in the interabdominal wall. They are epigastric hernia. The epigastric hernia occur due to weak linea alba in the epigastric region. It is common in elderly and multiparous. When intra-abdominal pressure is excessively raised, a small amount of extra peritoneal fat may protrude through the upper part of the linea alba, and eventually it drag the peritoneal sac containing the greater omentum. So you can see here, this is an image of the epigastric hernia. Now, Spigelian hernia. The Spigelian hernia occurs at the junction of arcuate line and linea semilunaris. I will show the image. So, if the hernia occurs at this line, that is arcuate line, at the junction of arcuate line and linea semilunaris, if hernia occurs along this line because of the weakness of the abdominal wall at this level, it is known as the Spigelian hernia. The next one is the incisional hernia. It is a midline incision along the linea alba may predispose to herniation. The linea alba is relatively avascular, and it heals the healing of the linea alba is very poor, and this makes the wall wall weaker. A stretchable scar may develop after healing, and this may result in the development of hernia along the line of scar or line of incision. So these are the few hernia which may occur in the interabdominal wall. So these are the references which I referred for preparing this presentation. Thank you. With that, I finished with my presentation, and I thank management and faculty of the SDM College of Ayurveda and Hospital, Udupi. I especially thank my guru, Professor G.S. Acharya sir, Principal SDM College of Ayurveda, for considering me for this presentation. I thank Professor Krishnamurthy sir, HOD, Department of Rachana Sharir, SDM College of Ayurveda, Dr. Nitin, Dr. Rashmi, Dr. Deepti for their support in this session. I thank my management, my principal, Professor Kalapi Patel sir, Principal JS Ayurveda Mahavidyalaya, for supporting me to present this guest lecture. Again, I thank all the audience for patiently hearing me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sitaram. So there is some questions. One from Dr. Arundhati S. Walwatkar.
Yes.
Good morning, sir. What could be the effects of uneven anterior abdominal wall, especially one side of umbilicus being distended slightly more than the other? No hernia diagnosed, maybe due to central obesity and also multiple lipomas on the surface. And is surgery the only option in this case?
Yes, in such cases, surgery will be the only options, because there is anatomical changes which occurred, which can't be the anatomical changes which occurred is more, and lipoma, etc. are there. The surgery will be the only option in such condition.
Thank you. One more question from Arjit Bhattacharya.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. At what age is it possible to perform abdominal wall muscle reconstruction for prune belly babies?
Uh, it is out of my scope actually. Uh, I may refer and answer this question. It will be better to ask any surgical people, surgery people.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So now I request our HOD Dr. Krishnamurthy sir for vote of thanks.
Respected today's guest speaker, Dr. Vaidya Sitaram Minantaya, for his elaborate and informative guest lecture. I thank him wholeheartedly. I thank our previous HOD, Dr. Holla sir, who has joined the webinar, and I thank the staff members, Sapna, Dr. Sapna, Dr. Vijayanath, Dr. Swati Badekar, Dr. Harshavardhan, Dr. Deepu, and Dr. Dini for joining this webinar. I thank all the students as well as all the delegates who have joined this webinar. Thank you one and all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.